Before we start the stories, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a nice comment. Now, I'll tell you the scariest story I know, my personal story. I grew up with a father who suffered from a severe mental illness and was also extremely violent. In the summer of the year I turned 16 and my younger brother was 14, my father shot at us with a hunting rifle from a very close range in the basement of our house. Fortunately, he missed my brother's heart by 2 inches, and by the grace of God, he is still alive today. When I returned home that evening, I found my stepmother wiping blood off the tiled floor. It was something that had never happened before. This was the most terrifying and incomprehensible scene I have ever witnessed in my life. Some might think that this attempted murder was enough to revoke parental rights, but unfortunately, the police said it was an accident and took no action. As for me and my brother, we were too afraid of our father to tell the truth. At 18 and 16, my brother and I decided to pack our things and leave the state we lived in. We never spoke to our father again. To this day, small pieces of shrapnel still occasionally surface in my brother's chest. I worked briefly as a firefighter. One day, we received a call about a car accident just half an hour into my shift. The man involved in the accident was driving home after a long night of heavy drinking. His car was hit on the right side when he ran a red light. His wife died instantly, while he remained almost unharmed. When we arrived at the scene, he was outside the car, while his wife was still sitting in the passenger seat. The lower part of her body was still in place, but the upper part was leaning toward the driver's seat, as if she had been trying to reach the driver's door to open it. She was unconscious and unresponsive. There was no visible blood on the driver's side, but the passenger door was severely damaged from the impact. The husband was still under the influence of alcohol and didn't grasp the severity of the situation. He kept asking us to quickly get his wife out of the car so they could go home. He was laughing and wandering unsteadily around the police officers. When the paramedics realized she had no pulse, we tried to pull her out from the driver's side. We discovered that the lower left part of her body, from the pelvis to the thigh, was completely shattered, and pieces of the door had penetrated her left abdomen. When we told him that his wife had died and that she had likely lost a lot of blood shortly after the accident, we saw the expression on his face change. He began with denial, stopped joking, then moved to realization, and finally ended up in a state of despair and panic. He suddenly became completely sober and ran to the driver's side, trying to violently pull his wife out. This sudden action tore her wound further, and we had to pull him away from her. Then he went to the passenger side and tried to open the deformed door with his hands. We left the scene shortly after, leaving the rest to the police. I saw the news report about it that day. One of my closest childhood friends had an aunt who was one of the kindest and most generous women you could ever meet. She was an example of humanity and love. This aunt started dating a man who fell in love with her because of her extreme kindness and generosity. But about a month into their relationship, he began accusing her of being too kind to others. He ended up brutally beating her until she lost consciousness, then committed a horrific crime against her. He cut out her heart from her chest while she was still alive. He believed that her kindness to others while they were in a serious relationship was the worst form of contempt toward him, and that he deserved to be the sole recipient of all her kindness and goodness. Whenever she treated people kindly without discrimination, he felt as if she was betraying him with everyone. He killed her because he couldn't accept the person she wanted to be. When their relationship began, the mere thought that people like this man exist in the world terrifies me. I was living next to a killer. Faye Sweaty was 6 years old when she was kidnapped from her front yard. The incident spread across all media outlets. There were news crews, police, and even the FBI filling the apartment complex where my fiancée and I lived. We met with FBI agents 3 times. They searched our entire home and everything in it. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. I was talking to my fiancée on a FaceTime video call while police officers were searching the trash cans right in front of my apartment. Suddenly, they pulled out a small shoe and a blood-stained knife. Later, they found her body dumped just about 300 feet from my home. The strangest thing was that the killer was watching the entire scene as they found the weapon used in the crime. The idiot had placed the knife in a trash bag with some of his mail, then went to his backyard balcony and slit his own throat. It was truly insane. I had spoken to this man several times and never knew he was a psychopath. All of this happened just a year ago, when I was 10 years old. I regularly participated in a children's choir club. One day my father came to pick me up and take me home. I found it strange because my mother always did that, but I didn't think much of it until we were about halfway home. My father began mumbling unclear words about how sorry he was and said that I wouldn't see him again. I was scared and very confused, and I started asking him what he meant, but he didn't answer. When we got home, he didn't get out of the car but urged me to go inside. Finally, he told me that I wouldn't see him again because he was going to die soon because of what he had done, and that the police would answer all my questions. After almost forcing me out of the car, I ran into the house, but no one was there. I found the door open and saw a pool of blood on the floor. The police were nearby and explained to me what had happened. My father suffered from extreme jealousy and had found an old box of condoms in the closet. He jumped to the insane conclusion that my mother had cheated on him. He didn't care that we had recently moved into this apartment and that these things might have been left by previous tenants, or that my father controlled my mother's every move and never allowed her to go out alone. The police took me to the hospital where my mother was, and fortunately, she was still alive receiving treatment. My father had violently hit her with a full wine bottle and shattered her skull. The only reason she survived was that my younger brother, who was 7 years old at the time, intervened. Without his intervention, my father would have killed my mother in a fit of jealousy. When he told me I wouldn't see him again, he meant that he was planning to commit suicide right after dropping me off. But he didn't succeed. The police managed to arrest him and admit him to a psychiatric hospital. To this day, this is the most terrifying experience I've been through in my life. But I always think about my brother. Imagine witnessing your mother being beaten almost to death by your father. We all suffered severe psychological trauma as a result of this incident, but somehow we became good people. I never told him how grateful I am that he was there at that time, but I really think I should tell him. Despite what my mother went through, she is the strongest and kindest woman I know. It takes tremendous strength to escape such an abusive marriage and continue living positively, all while raising her 2 children alone. When I was 7 years old, I was collecting stones in my aunt's front yard. Suddenly, an old beat-up truck stopped in front of the house. A man got out and started fiddling with something under the hood, then closed it. He turned to me and said, "Hey kid, do you know how to start a car using the clutch?" Since I grew up on a farm, I actually knew how to do that, so I answered yes. He said to me, "Help me quickly," and so I started walking toward his truck. At the last moment, I heard my mother calling me from the garage. I turned to see what she wanted, and as I turned my back, I heard the truck door slam shut, the engine start, and the man drive away. I didn't remember this incident much over all those years until one day, about 30 years later, when I was lying in bed ready to sleep. Suddenly, the memory came back to my mind like a slap. This man was trying to kidnap me. Oh my God. What would have happened? What kind of bullet did I dodge? Have you ever had an old memory come back to you and felt fear? I don't mean just ordinary fear, but deep fear that shakes your core. I trembled for about half an hour straight thinking about it, and the thought still terrifies me to this day. My mother's friend left her abusive husband. My mother met her while working at a women's shelter. They were very close, and my mother worked hard to secure a safe place for her. They did everything right. My mother helped her file divorce papers. But one morning, my mother couldn't reach her, even though they had planned to have lunch together. Then my mother opened the newspaper and saw the news. She called her job to say she was sick, something she had never done before. Then my mother sat me down crying and told me what had happened. Her friend was at home with her son when her ex-husband broke into the house. He killed her and left the child there in his mother's blood. After that, he committed suicide outside my store. The last we heard, the child, who was about 2 years old, went to live with his uncle. I can't imagine the horror that child felt, crying alone next to his mother's body in her blood for about 2 days until he was found. One night, my uncle was at a cafe and started talking to a stranger. My uncle described him as a very kind man. He met him several more times at the same cafe. They would drink and discuss random topics. But after a short while, my uncle stopped seeing this man at the cafe. I don't know how much time passed after that, but my uncle received a notice that he had to go perform jury duty. When he went, he discovered what the case was about. A serial killer was going to be tried, and it was the same man he had been friends with at the cafe, Derek Tobley. My uncle was immediately dismissed from the jury duty for obvious reasons. I worked the night shift at a gas station, and I've been in this field for a long time at various stations and in different areas with varying levels of criminal activity. Of course, I have regular customers. I'm a small-built woman, and so is my coworker who alternates shifts with me during the week. We always work together, so these regular customers often worry about us and make sure to keep an eye out for anything strange or suspicious when they can. There was a man who worked at the Metro an hour away and would come every morning to buy cigarettes. He never smiled and never seemed friendly. As usual, I always thought of ways to maybe make him smile one day. It took several months, but I finally succeeded in making him smile. When I put his cigarettes ready on the counter and pre-scanned them before he came in, he smiled. Then he asked me, "Aren't you sometimes afraid while working the night shift? You're a young girl. This isn't safe." I told him that I sometimes feel scared, but we can lock the doors and hide if we have to, and that the local police station, like state patrols if you're American, is very close, and they often come to wash their cars. I had a good relationship with those officers. He nodded, then began telling me a story about the early days after he arrived in our country from Eastern Europe with his wife and son in the late 1980s and early 1990s. He said he was working the night shift at a gas station and fell asleep during work. When he woke up, the phone had been ringing for hours, and his manager was shaking him violently, asking if he was okay. The man said he was fine, so what was the problem? He apologized for falling asleep. His manager shouted at him, "It's okay that you slept. Look outside." All the engine oil had disappeared, and the outside was a mess. Thieves had come and stolen all the oil and left without disturbing him because he was asleep during the entire incident. Then they moved to the next gas station to continue stealing. At that station, the clerk was awake and tried to resist them. So the thieves stabbed him to death and left him bleeding until he passed away. When he finished his story, he said to me, "If you ever feel sleepy at any time, just close the door and sleep. It might save your life." I don't work at that station anymore, but I always think about that man and wonder how his grandchildren are doing.